Welcome to a new Neon Jazz interview with a Renaissance man and saxophonist from New York City, Russ Nolan. He spoke recently with Neon Jazz about his latest album called Relentless, and that's how he lives his life. Along with music, he's active in sports, martial arts, business, after-school volunteering, educating, and has some serious salsa moves. From the suburbs of Chicago to the jazz mecca of New York City, we talk about his journey in jazz, along with much more. Dig it. How are you?
I'm good. I'm awake, showered, in my groove, have coffee in my system, ready to go.
Man, you're at 99%, man.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
So let me go ahead and start out with the alpha of your life. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in the Chicago area, a small town which isn't so small anymore. It's called Gurnee, Illinois. It's 15 minutes from the Wisconsin border.
So, being in that area, how did that area help cultivate jazz, if it actually did cultivate a love of jazz for you?
It really didn't, because I really didn't spend much time in the city of Chicago, which was, about a 40-minute drive from my parents' house. But I did become interested in, I don't know how I even got involved playing in bands, but just one day in fourth grade, I was sitting with my band teacher, who would become my band teacher, and he threw a bunch of instruments at me and said, "Okay, you're going to play clarinet." So that's where I started when I was in fourth grade. I was 10 years old, and by the time 3 years later, I had an interest in playing saxophone. And from there, I would say the most memorable experience that I had in the suburbs was just going to a community college concert, and I heard Toshiko's alto player, his name is Gary Foster, play a beautiful solo. He was featured in front of the community college band, and that's what kind of hooked me initially. Right on. So what about your family? Were they musically inclined? My dad had an interest in playing the clarinet when he was a kid. He never, said, "Hey, I play the clarinet, you should too." He was a cancer research scientist, so he had a whole other realm of science as opposed to music. I never got the science gene in that case. But he bought an organ for us when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and it was for him to play, and we started getting involved and took lessons on that. So I would say, even though I was not a prodigy, and my parents grew me for a music career, music was always a part of their lives, and they would go to community concerts and different things, all styles of music, theater, so forth and so on, for what we had at the time.
Yeah. So
in 1970s.
Absolutely. No, that sounds great, having an organ at the house.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how you went from a suburb of Chicago to New York City. Kind of recount that journey for yourself.
Sure. Well, the journey started at the end of high school. I'd actually quit band at that time. At the time, my high school was very marching band oriented and not so much jazz band oriented. And today, they've got 2 or 3 jazz bands that can play, probably at the level of most college jazz bands. But back then, there wasn't a whole lot of jazz going on, and I decided to focus on my sports, and that's what our community valued back then more than anything. And I was a basketball and baseball player, so I focused on that. But once I was out of high school, I realized, well, what am I going to do? I didn't make professional baseball, as I tried out for a few minor league teams. So I decided to go into music, and I had checked out a few colleges, and I had decided upon Northern Illinois University. So I spent the first 2 years there going to school. It's a college, a university about 80 miles west of Chicago. And even in that town, even in that university, there was probably 15, 20 saxophone students. I had hooked up with two of my saxophone teachers who both went to the University of North Texas, which back in the day was called North Texas State University. It's a very well-known jazz school. And I transferred down there, finished my education down there, got a small dose of what it's like to live in New York, because there were then 60 tenor saxophonists vying for about 18 spots in the jazz bands. So I got a good, healthy dose of competition and what it's like to compete in a larger environment. I then moved back to Chicago and stayed there for 10 years before I decided to move to New York in 2002.
Gotcha. So prior to your latest album, Relentless, what kind of projects with bands and albums have you been involved with?
Well, mostly I had done one avant-garde record with the Schuler brothers, Ed and George Schuler. It was under the direction of Burton Green, who's a avant-garde pianist. I have to say most of my ventures have been as a leader. I'm a songwriter, and I know pretty much exactly what I want. And my leader dates have covered. I started in recording in 2004 after getting a couple of years of exposure and absorbing all the great music that goes on in this city with a group of friends that I had been playing sessions with. And my second record, I decided to hire the Kenny Werner Trio, who Kenny Werner I've studied with, and he was actually the person who encouraged me to move to New York after taking a lesson with him in Chicago. And then after that, in 2012, that's when I started writing Latin jazz after dancing salsa for a few years. So that's kind of the progression of what I've done. I do sideman work, but as far as recordings, it's pretty much my projects.
Absolutely. So talk to me about Relentless. It's a great album. Talk to me about the creative process, the personal journey to get to this album and get it out.
Sure. Well, it's the title is the title track and the title of the record is really based on the fact that I think an artist in any genre needs to be relentless in order to survive and make a go of it in 21st century America. You have to just keep on it. And so I wrote a melody basically over the chord changes of Wayne Shorter's Fall that is just highly intense, never-ending. You think, there's for a horn player, there's barely the time to take a breath. So yeah. I had to mark off in my part where I was going to actually breathe. Write the actual letters, to breathe. So it was really another record that I had written during the time I had a steady gig in Midtown at a little-known hotel, and we played every Tuesday, and so it was a great workshop to bring in new tunes for the guys to try and complain over because they're too hard, that kind of thing. But basically, the last two records I had workshopped at that location. With Relentless, it was just a continuation of my Latin rhythm studies. I'm fascinated by just the sheer number and the diversity of rhythmic structures throughout the Latin world, and it's been my goal to apply the same dense harmonies and angular and sometimes very staid melodic melodies over that, the same as some of my peers have done. I greatly revere the writing of Manuel Valera and his New Cuban Express, and that's why I wanted him on the record. David Sanchez, Miguel Zanon, Danilo Perez. We can go on and on with the list. But I wanted to continue to study these great writers, my peers, to kind of find myself in that category of Latin jazz, where I'm not simply putting a standard to a bossa nova and calling it Latin jazz, but actually getting inside the music. I'm currently studying percussion to help me out on that aspect. And I also have a salsa band, so that kind of helps too. Glean information from the players who've been doing this for a long time, where I have not. So it's been an exciting journey, and Relentless is a combination of tunes I like, or tunes that would work in another setting outside of Latin jazz with another groove underneath it. But I started messing around with a bomba, and all of a sudden I had a measure of 5/4, and then it was connected to a measure of 4/4, and I decided, okay, well, this is going to be a bomba. It's just going to be a 9. Writing Afro-Cuban 6/8 tunes, with a certain clave that I've assigned to the bass player, and the drummer he figures it out from there. And then I always like to write a couple arrangements of standards or popular tunes. The record Tell Me, I had 4 arrangements on that record, ranging from Beatles tunes to Michael Jackson to Stevie Wonder, and even a Weather Report tune, and they're all taken completely out of context, but yet I keep the melodic integrity. So for Relentless, I actually wrote a tune that was recommended by a singer that I was going to write for her, but she didn't like the harmony to it, and I did. It was Stephen Sondheim's Not While I'm Around, which is probably one of the most played tracks on the record as I get my radio reports. And again, it was something that was taken completely out of context, all new chord changes, all new feel. It's on 4/4. It's in 3/4. It goes from a dark, somber piano ostinato into a bright samba. So, who's going to expect that? But that's my style of writing as far as arrangements, is that I'm going to keep the melody so that people recognize it, and yet I'm just going to turn the harmony and the rhythm on its head, and usually take it in another time signature. So that was fun. And then a week before the session, I decided to write another, and it was on Duke Ellington's Solitude, which, if you listen to that track, that's completely out of context.
Yeah.
Yet I kept the bridge the same.
Yeah.
The A sections are exploratory in a more of a free jazz, but not as avant-garde as some would call avant-garde, but just loosely improvised between Manuel and myself, with another piano ostinato, which of course I love, and there's really very little improvisation. The point of the piece is the arrangement and the textures, and that was also inspired. That style was inspired by a recording I heard of Lotus Blossom that Chris Potter did with his underground group, and I actually heard that live at the 55 Bar in New York. So again, being in New York, you get to hear a lot of things firsthand that most of the country does not unless they visit. So you can actually participate as a listener in some of my favorite musicians' creative process.
Absolutely. So why did you choose Latin jazz? Why'd you go down that route?
Well, as I alluded to before, I started salsa dancing 7 years ago. And before then, I was not really exposed to the artists that I had previously mentioned, like Miguel and David and Danilo. They all came through the Jazz Showcase in Chicago while I was living there, but it just really didn't stick with me until my Latin jazz vocabulary was limited to what I said before, where guys take jazz standards and they add a quote unquote Latin beat. Well, if you tell a rhythm section player, play this Latin, I mean, they're going to look at it funny. It's just not. It's not a descriptive of enough term to tell them what to do. So I started dancing because 95% of the jazz community, unfortunately, is male, and I was actually looking to date more in New York without the the aid of Mismatch.com and eDissonance. So it's just and then it all came about because I was dating a girl at the time before I started, and she's said, well, let's go to a dance class, let's go to a salsa class. And I realized that there were 3 women to every guy. And the women were they were just happy that the guy would even try to dance. So I thought, well, situation changed, where to go. And I got hooked up with the real Mambo King, Eddie Torres, who basically, he was Tito Puente's lead dancer for his years. And he basically started the whole New York style of salsa dancing, which I won't get into the particulars, but it's a little different than most of the country. But he's internationally known and is still at 63 years old, outperforming 25-year-olds. He's really amazing. So through studying, I realized, something, I know that rhythm that we're moving to now and we're choreographing to. I should start applying this back to the music. And I just realized, as a dancer, I'm just another member of the percussion section for the rhythm. So it was inspiring me to go back and with all the music that one can absorb in New York City, especially Latin jazz, I thought, well, let's give this thing a shot. And naturally, from where I grew up, I did not grow up in a household of musicians or had this music surrounding me. Manuel has been, he's probably been playing piano since he was 5 years old. His father is a well-known alto saxophonist and played with Irakere, I believe, and a number of other groups. I think I just saw a video with him and Ignacio Barola. So that was not my scene. So I've had to learn everything kind of the back way.
Yeah.
Academic point of view, and as I talk more to Manuel, he says, well, it's not something you can force, you just have to absorb it little by little, and
sure.
Especially the Cuban composers, it's traditional to write in clave to start off learning how to write Latin jazz. But now, once you write in clave, then you forget all the rules and you just write. Because oftentimes the clave is now more exciting than writing in clave. So, it's a journey, and certainly I'm just in the first few chapters of it. But that was the inspiration to go the Latin jazz route. And what interests me the most is how the previous composers mentioned will infuse the modern jazz harmony that I'm more familiar with my studies with Kenny Werner and just playing it and, of course, recording it, how that matches up against the Latin jazz or the Latin jazz rhythms, because most of the time, most of the salsa tunes that I've played before, the harmony is very simple. It can't go too many places because it's going to trip up the dancers, or the dancers are going to look at it, well, this isn't salsa, this is Latin jazz. So anyway, that's kind of the basis of why I decided on Latin jazz.
Right on. Good deal. No, go ahead.
Make one other point.
Sure.
I think what has happened, as far as a business standpoint, is that the people that, in general, it's fair to say that the majority of anyone's audience are going to be non-musicians. Otherwise, it's just an inbred thing that we're dealing with today, that the only people that come out and hear us play are our peers. But what's happened positively is that the community that I've engaged with in the salsa community, many of those people that love music but are not musicians have come out and heard my gigs.
Right.
So that's my audience, essentially. It's not necessarily the peers, but it's other people that from other walks of life that enjoy the same music I do that come out and hear us play. So
Absolutely.
It's been great.
That's cool. So I hear you're a Renaissance man. You're into sports, martial arts, business, after school, volunteering, music education. What's the most important to you? Or do they all play their own part, equal importance?
Yeah, I think all of it together has kind of formed me who I am as a person, not necessarily has a direct relation to my musicianship, but when you, as Chris Potter once told me when I was studying with him, eventually you just play like you are as a person. The information is there, the study is there, all the long practice hours, so forth and so on. But eventually, for an artist, it's the life experiences that a person has that they translate through their instrument or their voice is what really comes out and makes the artist who they are. So I think I don't know if there's one thing that has formed me artistically who I am, but I think it's just this collection of life experiences and the diversity that I've had. Although I cannot explain it specifically, it all contributes to the same thing.
Absolutely.
It's in the sauce. It's all in there. It's like Prego sauce,
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. So, how are you promoting your new album? Are you out gigging around? What kinds of things are you doing?
Yeah. Well, we have, as I've been working very hard with my amateur video production skills. I'm working on a promo video for our March 21st. That's 3 Fridays from now. We are having our CD release at Jazz at the Catano, which is the Catano Hotel just down from Grand Central. It's a beautiful jazz room. The booking agent keeps the piano in tip-top shape. Everybody loves to play it. So we're having a CD release here in New York on the 21st, and then in May I was fortunate enough to be part of the Firehouse 12 concert series, spring concert series in New Haven, Connecticut. It was a hard room to get into, but it's our debut there, and that's going to be May 16th. So on top of having CD release gigs, one that I had in January, actually, just as the record came out, was in my hometown of Chicago at the legendary Jazz Showcase with the musicians that I've been playing with for years there. So, having gigs for people that come here and play is important. I have a remarkable publicist, as you know, Terry Hinty, who hooked us up, and I also have a great radio promoter from Jazz Dog Promotions, which I believe my record should be on the chart, on the Jazz Week chart very soon. I'm a couple spins away. So it all goes, and of course, social media.
Absolutely.
Promoting your blog on my both my personal page and just a half an hour ago on my band page. To get Neon Jazz on there, and that's how you do it. It's everything. You
Absolutely.
try to angle all the time, and that's why it's relentless.
Absolutely.
Thing to do.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I noticed that your influences are Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Bill Evans, Chick Corea. If you could go back in time and meet a musician and watch him play, hang out with him, who would it be?
Well, that's a tough question. There's probably 50 of those, but I would probably like to be the road manager for Miles Davis's 1960s quintet with Wayne and Herbie and Tony Williams and Ron Carter. I mean, obviously, most of those guys are, at least 3 out of the 5 are still alive, and I can meet them. But I think absorbing, even if I was just sitting in the audience, even if I never talked to them, just sitting in the audience night after night and listening how they pay respect to the people, the masters before them, yet take it to that next level with the harmonies, with metric modulation, so forth and so on. I mean, being part of that history and absorbing. I often say, my father was born in 1930. He, in his 50s when bebop was really chugging along. I mean, he was 25 years old. Had he gone that route, he would have seen it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think maybe, and of course, Gosh, I would have loved to meet John Coltrane, and hang out with him. And I think because of the person he was, obviously that translated into the music he played. He could be very intense, of course, and then he could do a beautiful ballad record like his record Ballads, or the famous record with Johnny Hartman. There's different facets of personality that comes out depending on the situation.
Let me ask you this. If we project into the future, say 20 years from now you release an album, what would you like to see underneath your bio on your press release? What do you want it to say about your career and as it's gone along?
I would say, in general, I would say that Russ has continued to put out a better and better recording every 12 to 16 months for the last 20 years. And this is, never saying that this is his peak, but, that he's going to continue to, interest audiences by the next new thing that he comes up with. And that people can see a progression from 2004 to, 2024 or 2030, however long it takes. I mean, I plan to do this until I stop breathing. So, my creative spirit wants to get something out every 12 to 16 months. Everybody would like to have accolades of playing with such and so on and things like that. But I think staying true to myself, putting, what I feel is in my soul, out every year, regardless of what the critics or my peers say about it. But I think it's just that being a person of longevity, I think, is really the key.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if I have it's not about Grammy nominated or Grammy winner or 5 stars from Downbeat or it's not those kind of things. It's just to be an example of sticking with what's in a person's heart and what they feel their calling is. And 20 years, who would have thought that he was still going?
Right on.
So
good deal.
Yeah.
So when you look back on your music career up to this point, do you have any regrets?
Well, I think the only regret I have, which I would contradict what I said about having all these other experiences, was not being serious about music as a kid.
Right.
I was focused on sports, but we're in some ways we are products of our environment and what we're exposed to. I grew up in a very intense sports town where music was just not that important. Music was subservient to the football coach wanting a marching band at halftime.
Yeah.
There wasn't talk of as my dad was creating breast cancer tests, diagnostics for his company. There wasn't that level of intensity about finding the next Miles Davis or John Coltrane or the next superstar, music superstar in my community. It just wasn't there. So I would say if I had to do it over per se, knowing that I would take this career path, which I didn't really know until after high school, I would have studied music a little harder, more intense, and taken private lessons earlier. But I feel I'll be 46 next month already. Try not to think about it, but the fact is, I'm still young. I keep myself in the best shape I possibly can. My mind is young because I always want to create and learn the next thing. Both my wife and I, although she's in a completely different field, we feel that staying young is to keep dancing, to keep expanding our minds to learning different things. We're finally taking a Spanish class together, although she grew up in an environment where Spanish was heavily influenced in her community. But it's keeping young mentally. That's what keeps, I think, has a great connection to what keeps people young physically.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think, but at the same time, I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for those other activities. So it's funny, there's in a larger sense, part of who we are. At least one person has said that half of who we are are the things that happen to us, or the environment we're in, and maybe half or some degree is, of course, determined by what we decide to do. So it's that individual combination that hopefully will continue to come out in my music.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes me uniquely me. I don't have to tell you how many great tenor saxophone players there are in the world. I live, 5 miles from, hundreds of world-class tenor players, but there's really only one Russ Nolan, and that's what I want to keep focusing on.
Right on. So let me get a kind of a flavor of what you listen to. What's the last album or song you listened to before we interviewed today?
Well, I was listening to your blog spots because become more familiar with your program, and I was live. I was listening to another Latin jazz musician, Edward Perez. We have probably one venue in all of New York City dedicated to only Latin music. In Queens. I live in Queens.
Yeah.
Called Terraza 7, and it's a club that's only 5 stops away from my apartment. And the tenor player on there was Mark Shim, who's performed on Luis Perdomo's record, amongst a lot of others. But he has a heavy Joe Henderson influence in his playing, which is, he's an amazing player. So I was listening to your posting on Horace Silver's Song from My Father.
Right on.
That was a great choice by you, Joe, and I listened to the whole thing.
Right on.
Taking care of busy work and things like that. It was great to hear that classic sound from that era. As I said, I'm always looking forward to, I'm always in the process of writing a new tune, bringing new tunes to sessions, because as we're playing and performing the music of Relentless, I've already written another 9 tunes for the next record.
Right.
So, and I want to keep pushing myself, and pushing myself, I've been listening to a lot of Abaquá music, Cuban music. I've been listening to, I continue to study Manuel Valera's music with his new Cuban Express. Now that he has a couple records out, I'm always fascinated at how he puts things together. Even though he tells me he is not as scientific as it seems, in our previous conversations. Listen to Miguel Zanon. I'll listen to, I have to say most of my listening is Latin music, or just because I want to continue my immersion. But if there's a classical performance to go to, I've been studying flute. I have a great flute teacher, who's a longtime friend of mine, and we're trading flute lessons for jazz on flute lessons. So, and we go to Flute Society performances and hear Hungarian flautists, French flautists that are world class. And again, I think for some of the difficulties living in New York, the positives is being right at the center of the culture and being able to take a train half an hour to go hear music that you just wouldn't hear anywhere else.
Absolutely.
Or at least maybe once every 5 years. So it's all in there somewhere. It's in my brain. Whether it can be called upon when I really need it is another thing. As you can tell, I'm really not at a loss for words, but sometimes I'm at loss for a phrase to or an idea to write down on paper, or in the heat of battle on the bandstand, for some reason, the idea that I thought I had just didn't come to me. So, it's always feeding the brain.
Well, the beauty of age is that hindsight's 20/20. But I'll tell you what, as time goes on, it's really hard to focus on things in the rearview mirror. There's so much, and it gets far away. But I think we got a good overview of who you are over this interview. But I want to kind of bring it down to a pinhead, and I want to ask you, in the length of one tweet in 144 characters, tell me who Russ Nolan is.
As a person, or as an artist?
Both. Like the essence of who you are.
Well, I believe I'm a person always striving for excellence and for truth. My music, through music, I not only satisfy the intellect of my peers, but I also reach everyone on a soulful level. I think that's about 140 characters.
Yeah, that's it. I think you hit it right on the head. Russ, it was my pleasure, man. You're a very cool cat. I'd love to meet you when you come to town. Keep on doing the good work.
Yes, well, likewise. Without people like you, there is no jazz media. So we appreciate that you're getting out the word for us.
Yeah, I love you guys, man. I'm here, and I love the music, so keep on keeping on.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Kansas City, New York, and around America, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Russ for his time and insight into his craft and dedication to jazz. If you want to hear more interviews, go to the Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or for all things Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.